Hi guys, welcome back. Number 7. So look forward in the book a little bit from the last video, and we had one more thing to do before we mount our ESC. It does tell us to mount our ESC next, but we're gonna do that after we do the complete thing, because that's the end of the book right here. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna do our battery mounting. So I'm gonna take my Genzace Redline battery here, which are the batteries that I prefer to use. I'm going to set that into place and make sure that it's fit correctly. So there's a company called RC Body Armor that has kits that you can buy for insulation and padding for your car. What I'm going to use some stuff called the hatch patch. And I'm going to use that as the cushion underneath my battery. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line my battery up on the side of this thing, square it up. And that's going to give me an idea of where I need to cut. And if you're somewhere where you can use an X-Acto knife on a tabletop, that will work. Or you do like me and just use a pair of body scissors and cut the hatch patch along the perimeter of the battery. Alright. So basically all we're doing is we're adding a little foam pad to the chassis where the battery sits. So when you jump, it kind of cushions the battery a little bit. Excuse me. I'll cut it. Make sure your surface is really clean. I'm going to take this piece of hatch patch after peeling the backing off, and we're going to stick it right down to the chassis. So that covers the whole battery tray area where your battery sits. So I use a LCG 4-cell battery, and this stuff works beautifully for it. So I put the balance cap back on there so it sits down all the way. Alright, so we're going to put the battery cover mounting on here. So if we look at the instructions, we've got 2 screws that are 2 different sizes on each end, and that's what we're going to use to mount our battery down. The large end has a hex on the end of it. That looks like it is a 2mm. Let me find my 2mm wrench here. Yes, that's correct. It's a 2mm. So we're going to take our thread locker and we're going to put it on the small threaded section. Or we're going to screw them into the top of our battery mount post here. We're going to tighten it down pretty good. We'll do the same thing with the other side. Snug it down really good. Alright, and then we should have our Mayako carbon fiber top battery cover. So in the book they show it facing this direction. It sits down in there like so. Now, because I'm using an LCG, I've got a little bit of play underneath here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of that hatch patch and I'm going to put it on the back side of this plate also. I'm going to cut it just wide enough to where it doesn't stick out anywhere, but it provides a strip of cushioning that kind of fills in that space. And if that cover still feels loose, then I can either add another layer of foam underneath the battery, or I can use their thicker foam. I think it's called the landing pad, and we can put some of that down underneath it also. Alright, that filled up that space. So, piece of hatch patch underneath, piece of hatch patch on top. I'm going to tighten this down. Battery's got nice foam cushioning on top and the bottom. Now, there's should be 2 nuts here. That one's got a screw sticking through it. Get it out of there. So this mount goes down with 2 nuts. And I think that's going to be the other size nut driver, the big nut driver here. This is a 7mm. Yep. These screws go down with a 7mm nut driver. Now in the future, what I may do is I may see if I can get some 4mm thumb nuts to go on here. My last car, I had screws holding my batteries down with the cover, so using something like this to hold it down is not a big deal to me. It is what it is. You know, it's just continuing on with what I've always done. The difference is I got a nut to take off versus screws. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave the battery in there, and then we'll take a walk on to the next step, which is going to be mounting the ESC and soldering everything. So got our ESC here. Matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and close the instruction manual off of the screen so you can see what I'm doing completely here. I'll try to rotate everything so you can see as good as possible on the camera. Alright, here's our ESC. Alright, what comes in there is we got an extra little fan guard, we got some heat shrink, battery wires, ESC wires, and a capacitor pack that we're not going to use. Alright, we're going to start by getting our motor wires out of the way here, and our battery wires. I know what I forgot to grab yesterday. I forgot to grab my helping hands to help with this, but that's okay. I can do this without them. Alright, so we're going to have two wires that were together. One's got a red piece on it. These are our battery terminal wires. We'll set these over here. Set of three wires that were together. Those are the wires that go from the ESC to the motor. On our ESC, each of these terminals are labeled. So we've got A, B, C for our motor leads. And then we've got a positive and a negative for our leads that go to the battery. So I'm going to go ahead and power up my solder gun, let it start warming up. Got some electronics flux here. Go to each one of these terminals. I'm going to put a little bit of flux on each terminal. Make sure you get it on everywhere where you're going to want the solder to touch. My flux has been around a little bit, so the brush isn't the best in the world, but I can work with it. Alright. Take my solder. What I like to use is SRA solder, 6040. I don't use flux core, but some people like to use flux core. There's nothing wrong with that. I just prefer using my own flux and then non-flux core solder. Alright, my solder gun is heated to 750 degrees. I'm going to put it in my brass cleaning wire here. Clean the tip off. Now, you take some solder, get about a quarter inch of it on the tip of your gun. And put it on the terminal where you want it to go, where the flux is. Kind of work it in there. Allow the solder to coat. You can use a tip to kind of make the solder touch every piece of it and coat every piece of it. Sometimes it takes a few seconds to warm up enough for it to stick. But this process is called tinning. So basically what we're doing is we're just make sure we got a good solder base. See how that one's silver versus the other two. Make sure that the solder's sticking to the surface. Doing these terminals, I could run my temperature up a little bit more, but I'm happy with not overheating the pieces that I'm soldering to. More solder on that one. Next one. Also, when you tin your connections, it reduces the chance of the cold solder connection. So, always a safe bet to tin your wires and tin your connections before you put them together. There we go. Go back to that middle one, see?
Gmail.
The middle one's okay. It's just got a little bit extra flux in there. Alright, while I'm doing this, I'm going to go ahead and do the battery terminal side. I already fluxed them, so it's just a matter of just getting the solder to tin and set. And keep in mind, guys, you don't want to run your solder gun up really, really hot when you're soldering to the electronics. So you don't want max temperature out of your solder gun. Especially if it's one like mine that you can get it up to pretty crazy temperatures. Like 850 degrees plus. You get it too hot, you run a higher risk of unsoldering your terminals from the board inside of the electronic piece, whether it be your ESC or your motor. You don't want that. Makes for a bad day. And they don't like the warranty stuff that customers tear up like that. Alright, so those two terminals and those three terminals right there, nice and tinned in. So I'm going to tip off. Alright, when I solder ESCs in, I like to solder my wires on my ESC before I mount it, because once you get it inside the car, it's really hard to get to the terminals. You got stuff in the way, there's not enough room, whatever. So, best thing for you to do, don't mind me, I'm just looking at mounting possibilities in there. Alright, best thing to do is solder these things outside of the car. So I've got my first wire here. Also don't want to cut my wires down until the ESC is mounted down. That way we can figure out how long we want our wires, because we could dress the car up a lot just by making the wires shorter. Alright, these wires are pre-soldered on the end, but I went ahead and I fluxed it. I'm going to take some solder on my solder gun, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to retin this wire with my solder. Sometimes the manufacturers put a solder on their wires that is not compatible with the solder that you're using very much. So you just want to make sure that it will melt together and everything's fine. So, need some more solder. Get the ESC in a good mounting position where I can see. I'm going to put the wire inside terminal C. I'm going to add heat to the end of the wire. Try to melt the solder on the wire and on the terminal of the ESC together. Adding more solder to your tip is needed, but I think I got a good amount on the first try. Nice, beautiful, clean solder joint. It all went right together. How about that? Not my first rodeo, won't be my last. Alright, and we're going to take our next wire. We're going to do the same thing, get a little bit of flux on the end. Roll a little bit more solder out. We're going to get some more solder on our tip. Then we're going to tin the end of this wire again. So what I do is I get some of that solder to stick to the tip of my gun, and then I set it on the wire and I kind of work, see if I can get it where you guys can see it. I just run the tip around the end of the wire, watching the solder melt, make sure I can see it pulling into the threads of the wire. Adding the extra bit of solder also keeps me from having to add a lot more solder when I put it on the terminal. I'm going to take that wire, I'm going to set it on the terminal. Set my solder gun on the wire. Work it around as the heat goes in, make sure I can see the solder melting. I'm going to add a little bit more. Didn't have quite enough solder on my tip. You're going to make sure when you're putting this stuff together you can actually see the solder melting on the terminal block too, because we want this wire, the solder, to stick. Oh. Try it again. I'm trying to do it where there's light and alright. Wire number 2 looks good. Make sure you pull on your wires, wiggle them around. Look at that. Cold solder joints. That's why we do it. What that would have done is, first race I would have gotten into, that would have popped off. Let's do that one again. Let's add a little bit more solder on that. Also possible I didn't let it cool quite enough before I pulled on it, because that thing does hold a good bit of heat on that terminal for a little while. Alright, really looks like it's stuck in there that time. I'm going to let that cool a little bit before I pull on it again. I'm going to do the third wire. A little bit of flux. Solder on the tip. Heat get in there and work solder around. Make sure you see it moving around inside the wire too. Looks almost like you're playing with mercury when you're doing it. Just don't touch it, it's hot. Alright, we'll do our A terminal. The ESC leaned up properly. Alright. Well, that one just went right in there real quick. Nice and easy. Good flow coverage all the way around. I'm going to take that middle wire, I'm going to pull on it again just to make sure. Yep, middle wire is good. The last one I did still kind of shiny. I don't want to pull on it quite yet. I'm going to blow on it. Now pull on it. Everything's nice and good. Everything's nice and tight. Now we're going to do the same thing to the other side with the battery leads. The one with the red stripe goes on the positive. And I'm going to leave the strip on the battery end. That way when I put this in, I know where everything's at. I don't have to worry about any mistakes when it comes to this. Once I get the ESC mounted down, you normally can't see the color of the marking on the side of the ESC to tell if it's positive or negative. So we always want to try to color code our positive terminal, especially if you're using pins like I am. Now if you're using XT90s, XT60s, yeah, you can get away with just using make sure you hook up the right terminal to the right wire, and they're kind of made to where you can't make a mistake. They only plug in one way. We're going to do this positive lead on the positive terminal of the ESC. Like it flowed in there really good. Look down with my breath and then
motion detected.
Pull on it. And we're going to tin up this. There's a cap. We're going to tin up the negative wire. Ooh, a dog hair on that. We're going to tin up the negative wire where we just put the flux on it. If you get these wires that are pre-stripped and pre-soldered on the end, sometimes it's a little bit longer or a little bit shorter on the end than what you want. You can cut it down or strip it back a little bit further if you need to. A little more solder. This one's the longest out of the bunch, but it's still fine for the terminal. I'm not going to have a bunch sticking out everywhere. When you're soldering those, also a good rule of thumb is when you got your solder gun pushed down on there and you see the solder starting to melt, you can twist the wire a little bit, and if you feel the strands of the wire moving in there, a lot of times the solder's all the way through. Beautiful flow, beautiful coverage, nice and smooth solder connection. Sweet. So I'm going to go back through, I'm going to pull on all my connections, wiggle them.
Motion detected.
Make sure everything's tight. And it is. Alright guys. Now the Hobby Wings send me a sticky pad to go on the bottom of this ESC. No, they quit putting those in the package apparently. So I've got some servo tape here. I'm going to use that to put this together, and then later on I'll come back in and I'll do I'll mount my ESC down a different way. I'll probably put some more hatch patch down and then some CA glue or E6000 to stick it down. These new ESCs also have screw holes in the bottom. So if you wanted to mount it down, some cars, Bachelor specifically, have a ESC plate in there with screw holes in it. Or you can drill some holes and put it on there. So I'm going to figure out which way I want to do this. So I'm going to put two strips side by side, short ways across. Trim it to fit. I'm putting two pieces on here. If one decides it's going to start peeling, then it's not going to peel everything off. It'll still have one piece that's kind of sticking. Alright, and we're going to peel our safety backer off. And this is what they call clear servo tape. Some pretty good stuff. I could probably get a month or so when I was using the heavy ESCs. This is a smaller, lighter ESC. I don't know how well it'll hold up. I may send it how it is and then just see if it'll hold up. Alright, I'm going to look at where my wires are at. So I'm going to mount this with the wires inboard for the ESC, or for the motor, with my wire connections for my power switch and my servo. Oh boy, here. How long is that wire for the power switch? Alright, I'm going to mount it with my... No, it's not going to work that way because the drive shaft's in the way. So, yes, we're going to mount it the way I originally thought. We're going to have motor wires in there. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my sensor wire, that sensor plug, on the side of the ESC. I'm going to go ahead and plug my new sensor wire right into the side of the ESC before I put it in, because I want to see the clearance of this drive shaft here. Alright, so I'm going to mount this with my receiver wire power switch facing forward, motor leads facing back, and sensor wire facing back. That's going to be my best route of action here. I do not like how that sensor wire is in there, but if I turn the ESC sideways, it's going to put the wires right up against that drive shaft, and you know, rotating metal with wires is never a good idea. So my battery terminals are going to be long enough. They're going to reach my plugs on the battery. That's also why I left the battery in there, so I could see that. And then we've got our ESC wires. That middle wire just came back off again. Alright, let me get the ESC back out of here. I pulled and jerked on that thing and it did not. Didn't turn off the solder gun yet. I'm going to try this one more time. That's frustrating. Sometimes there's just that one terminal that does not want to take solder. So sometimes you'll get what's called a cold solder connection. That just, everything looks like it melted, but nothing really went together. Make sure you get plenty of heat on this bad boy. Roll it around until I could feel the wires moving in there. Alright, I know for a fact that one went. That one came out super smooth. Super smooth. I don't have a bead around that, so it's definitely stuck on. I'm gonna check my servo tape. It still looks okay. The one drawback I see to this XR8 Pro ESC is where the wires come out of it. I'm not a fan of where these wires come out. They come out kind of high on the sides of the base. So they are pretty close to everything. And I can't mount it the way I want to because then it's going to put it right up against the center shaft. But that sensor wire, I was able to fold the wire up kind of flat on the side, so that should be alright. Before I put the motor leads on, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plug the other end of the sensor wire into the end of the motor. Fold the wire over. I'm going to line the plug up. I'm going to use the end of the hex. I'm going to coax that into the plug. I'm putting that in the right direction. It'll go right in there. Yep. Alright, so sensor wire is plugged into the motor. I'm just going to leave that up and out of the way. Now, we're going to do the motor leads. So our motor leads, remember, we've got our A over here, we've got our B in the middle, we've got our C on this side. So the A terminal on this side is going to go to our far terminal on the motor. So I'm going to kind of shape this wire how I want it. Kind of make it a little dressy. And once I get it figured out where I want it, I'm going to cut the wire to length. I'm going to strip enough off to where it's as long as the terminal I'm connecting to on the motor. Don't need to be longer. You can go a little shorter if you want to, but I prefer mine just a little bit longer. Alright, now get a little flux on my brush here. About time for some more flux. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get the motor ready to be tinned. The wire I just cut, I'll go ahead and flux the hell out of that. So I'm not going to do the other two yet. I like to cut and mount my wires one at a time. So what I'm doing is I've got my stuff already set up. So I'm going to tin the motor terminals. I'm going to tin this wire that's coming off the ESC for the motor side. And then I'm going to solder this wire to the motor. And then we'll do the next wire and then the next wire. So let's get our solder gun, clean tip. Let's tin our motor terminal here. I'll pick this up and I'll show it to you guys after I'm done so you can see what a 10 terminal looks like on the motor. Alright, this terminal A. If you get a good amount of flux on here and you're using a good quality solder, it normally comes out really good. You run into less cold solder issues, less flow issues, and overall just looks to be a lot more quality connection. Alright, so we've got our Medusa here. See my motor terminals nice and silver. I've got them tinned up. I've got my wire here cut, stripped back. It'll go on this furthest terminal here, and it's the same length. So when I solder it down, I'm going to have good continuous connection all the way across. So now I'm going to tin this wire that I cut. Because this wire is shorter, I'm going to hold it with a pair of needle nose pliers. Move it so I can get a good look at it. When you're tinning a bare wire that doesn't already have solder on it, sometimes you're going to need to feed a little bit more solder onto your tip. Normally takes me 2 or 3 feeds on there. So 2 will be my ticket this time. Looks good for my house. Get this sensor wire pushed down and out of the way. Take this wire, I'm going to grab it. Give some solder on my tip. I'll hold the wire into place on the terminal. I'm going to add heat to the wire. Top of the wire, pressing the gun into the wire. Allow the solder on the wire to melt, and it should transfer enough heat into the terminal to where it should all seal together. Oh, let it move. Well, it was still melty. The light's not in a good position. I can't see what I'm doing while I'm doing it. Work it in there until we can see the solder on the terminal liquidize. And you'll see it squish out. Holding that wire in a bad place with that. Soldering is not normally this difficult. I'm just gonna add a little bit more solder to my tip, I think. More solder. And that's it. Let me get the edges cleaned up on it. There's an ugly solder joint there. Ugly. Let that cool into place. Oh, it didn't take it off. So, let me take a look at this wire and see what happened here. So, looks like the core of the wire did not tend very well. So I'm going to cut the tip off this thing. Strip this off again. May not have had enough flux on it when I did it the first time. All right. Now, let us try this again. I don't think I fluxed and soldered enough of the wire when I tended to begin with, so it ended up fighting me. Didn't get good heat transfer through the wire because of that. It wasn't melting the solder on the terminal, so this time I'm just going to make sure I got plenty of solder on it. Alright. It might have flowed through a little bit better that time. Let's see. Oh, some more solder so I can get it on my tip. And make sure I got some on my solder gun. In place.
Move. Move. Move.
I think I see the solder melting on the terminal. Yes. It moved. Okay. There we go. We'll let it solidify for a second and we'll see what it does. Alright, good solid connection that time. It fought me, but I got it. The tip off. Next we're going to do the B terminal. Again, we're going to dress it up. Make sure the routing looks good. I make a little hair longer, that way if the wire ends up having an issue like we did last time, we have to pull it tight, it's still not going to look bad. Always get a little extra. I'm going to tin this wire up. Of course, I've already got the terminal tinned up. We did that earlier. Do 2 or 3 rounds of solder on there. Make sure we got good penetration of the solder through the whole wire. Now the stock wire that Hobbywing sends out is a copper core, and it seems like it's a little bit harder to solder. I don't know if they changed their wire supplier or brand or whatever, but it's not near as good as the wire they used to have. Alright. Now for terminal B. Work my solder on there. Heat up the terminal. So you see the wire melt into place. Alright, just so squish out. And I'll let it cool. Take the tip of my solder gun. I'm just going to make sure that we got a nice little gap in between terminals because we don't want to touch A to B or B to C. Alright, looks like we got that one. And tip off. Alright. Now we've got wire C. Push this wire through and dress it up a little bit. And that goes there like so. We'll go and tin this one up, get it ready to go on. Wire's tripped. Just putting a flux on there.
There you go. You can have a little. 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 Please don't get it on me. You can have a little bit more.
Gmail.
You can have a little bit more.
Y'all can hear my wife in the background. She's giving the dogs peanut butter, I think.
Alright, that's it. No more. Good. Alright, he's had his meds. I'm leaving.
Okay. Alright, wire's nice and tinned.
See you in a couple hours.
Yes, ma'am.
Love you.
Love you too. Alright, get this wire in position.
You want me to shut the bedroom door?
Put the gate up. So apply heat through the tinned wire until we see the solder splish on the terminal. It melts together. Like so. All right, nice tight connection. All right, now I have
Motion
A
detected.
going to A, B going to B, C going to C on my solder connections. All my connections are tight, nothing's pulling apart. So, on my battery terminals, I got my two brass pins right here that go to my batteries. And my wires for my battery are a good length. I don't want to trim anything off of that. I'll leave a little extra on these specifically because if I have to replace the pins, I need to cut the ends off. Then it will have a little bit of extra there just to save the day. Normally leave enough to where I can repair it, say 2 or 3 times, because eventually the ESC is going to have to be replaced or taken out for whatever reason.
Motion detected.
Alright. I'm going to tin the ends of these wires right quick, just a little add solder to the factory solder, already fluxed it. So just making sure that their flux or their solder meshes with my solder. Mixes it together, make sure it's compatible. No Hobby Wing stuff normally is, but the one time I don't do this is going to be the one time it fights me. I've gotten these wires before and they're a pain in the butt. Alright, now we got that. Alright, now we're going to tin the heads of the brass pins. There's some people who make ones that have a pull tab head on them. Unfortunately, the battery manufacturer doesn't send out anything like that with theirs, so I'm kind of just having to do what I can do. Alright, so not the ideal way to do it, but I'm going to hold this pair of channel locks or a pair of needle nose. Already got flux on it. I'm going to take a little bit of solder. And just like tinning the brass connections on the ESC, I'm going to apply heat. Make sure I want to get a nice coating of solder over every surface that I'm going to be soldering to. Don't put so much to where it's running down the sides, because then it won't plug into the battery. Let it cool off for a second before I set it down, because I don't want it to burn anything. Get a paper towel down there that'll catch any of the excess flux. Alright, now we're going to tin the other terminal. Beautiful. Alright, I keep hearing that crunchy noise. I'm cleaning the tip off. I've got a brass Brillo pad under my holster for the tip. Let's see. Don't cool off enough to touch it. Yep. Alright, so because I don't have my helping hands with me, I'm going to get kind of ingenious with this. Well, not really. Just do it the hard way, really. So I'm going to make sure I'm holding my needle nose in the proper alignment to get the wire in there. I'm going to use the tip to manipulate, my solder tip to manipulate the wire where I want it to go, as well as being able to move the needle nose into place. Make sure I got a nice bit of solder on there. Squeeze the needle nose just enough to be able to hang onto this thing without it twisting as I'm manipulating it. It's like every other time, we're heating the wire, moving it back and forth until it melts the solder that we used to tin on the end. Hold that still, let that cool just a second, and that gets more solder. Oh, stop. Add some more. It moved. Alright, I think that's going to be my ticket right there. Let it cool off for a few seconds. Blow on it. I'm going to add just a little bit more solder to that thing. I'm going to get a little dome to this because I'll be pulling on this frequently, so I want to make sure that good as possible. Where am I? There it goes. Alright, don't know if y'all can see that on the camera, but it's a nice, smooth, beautiful solder joint. Completely sealed. And now we're going to take our other battery terminal tip here, or insert. Got some solder on our tip. Get everything heated up here. Nail nose are terrible for holding stuff flush. Especially if you're providing rotational force on it. Come on, buddy, you can do it. Come on, buddy, you can do it. Yep, started to melt. So we got to find the spring tension. This wire, which I think is going to be right in this area here. We don't want that wire to spring back or anything, so we want the wire to be where it's happy. Then hold it in place. You work with the wire. Just remember that when you're soldering, you work with the wire don't want to work with you. I want to add just a little bit more solder. It looks good, but I just want to add just a little structure to it. Here again, I'll be pulling on these terminals, so I want to make sure that it's a little bit stronger than just a wire with some solder wrapped around it. Alright, and that one looks good. So at this point, we've got our motor wired up. We've got our battery terminals wired up. We've got our servo in place. Now the ESC is in place, we can start getting our wires kind of worked around how we want them, where the receiver's going to go. So we've got several wires coming around the side. Our power button is going to get mounted over here, and our receiver wire for our ESC is going over here. Now that the servo or the ESC wire is hooked up to the motor, I can kind of get my sensor wire up where I'm going to need it. So I'm going to get my little zip ties out. I'm going to dress this up a little bit before I start mounting the smaller electronics down. So I like to dress my wires. It's not a professional, pretty job, but I do like to kind of at least make it partially look like I gave a shit. And I don't want any pulling or wiggle on my sensor wire more than anything, because they're the highest fail item in here, I believe. I think the sensor wires are the absolute worst for moving around, rubbing through, wearing out, wires coming apart on the ends of them, whatnot. So I just dressed it to my C terminal up here. Make sure that the wire's not going to rub on anything sharp on that plug. My motor wires are nice and short and tight and snug, so they're not going to move around much, so I don't really think I got to worry about too much there. I'm going to put one zip tie around all three just to marry them together. Minimize that much more movement. take the sharp part of the zip tie that I cut and make sure they're out of the way so I don't have to worry about rubbing myself on them and cutting a finger or an arm. Alright, go ahead and turn the solder gun off because I believe we're done with the soldering. Put the cap on the Loctite. Alright guys, so at this point this is what we have. Motor soldered into place. ESC is in place and soldered. We've got our sensor wire on this side of the ESC. Power switch and everything on this side of the ESC. And it's kind of tight in there, but it's between the servo and the ESC, and the sensor wires between the motor and the ESC. I don't like that, but I kind of limited because they don't have somewhere else to plug the sensor in, and the sensor plug is in a really bad place on the ESC. If I know it was going to be that much of a problem, I would have probably looked at getting a different style ESC, because if we put it on this side, it's the same height as my drive shaft down there. So if the wire's coming out, I'm going to have to pull that wire really taut up to keep it from rubbing the drive shaft. Now, if something happens, let's say double-sided tape or whatever I've got this ESC attached down to comes loose a little bit and it starts to move, it's going to hit that drive shaft. And now I'm driving around the track with my wires getting ate off the side, right off the side of the ESC. I'm not even talking about like a couple millimeters away. I'm talking right up to the boot on the side of this thing. So yeah, no, I don't like that. My Macklin ESCs, I normally use they've got plugs in the top that the wires are plugged into that are replaceable. So if, say, I break a wire, I contact Macklin, or I keep an extra one around, and I just unplug the wire, plug the new wire in, and then plug it into my receiver. No problem. But Hobbywing's trying to make stuff a little bit smaller. They're trying to maximize their profits, I think, make it smaller and a little bit more expensive. So now they just need to work on getting these wires where they need to be. For those of us who have cars that everything is tight under the hood. This is the G3 XR8 Pro, which is basically the new style SCT size ESC. It's the same size as the SCT ESC that I have in my short course truck. That's a low C 3.0 SCTE that I've had for years. Just looks like a freshened up SCT ESC. Alright guys, so now we're going to start working into getting the receiver, power switch, and everything plugged into that. So I'm going to reach over here to my other car. My ESC is plugged into 2. Servo plugs into 1. Get this plug out of here. I use Futaba, and the Futaba plugs are really tight. So here's my receiver. Has an MRT transponder on it. They're a little dusty from the last couple of races I've been into, but that's okay. They can be dusty as long as they work. So before I stick this down, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get all my wires plugged in where they need to be. So I've got my servos going to go on terminal 1. Right there. My ESC is going to plug into terminal 2. So it's right there. Make sure you got them facing the right direction. Most of the time, if you can see the edges of the terminals, they'll face up when you're looking at the lettering on there. The little clip section where you can actually see the brass or copper terminals inside there will face up. And that puts your positive and your negative in the communication in the right place on there. Okay, so with this, I'm going to start mounting some stuff down with some servo tape. And then later on, I'll probably come back in with some E6000 and do a little bit more permanent mounting. I didn't want to go in with E6000 to begin with because I'm not 100% sure that I'm going to leave everything where it's at, and the E6000 is a pain in the rear to get off. Once it's down, it's down. You can get it off, but it's going to be a fight. So just use servo tape for our original setup. Make sure we're happy with where everything's at. You can look at the forums online and you can see where other drivers have set their stuff up and kind of decide where you want your stuff permanently and go ahead and set it up as such. But they do not give you a receiver box with this car. I had made one on my other car, which who knows, I may end up using that in the long run. I'm not 100% sure I'm going to like this electronic components just mounted around kind of deal. So this is a antennaless receiver. It's already set up for my other car, so when I look at my remote and it says Mayako, it's going to be the same deal. It's going to be the Mayako. I've got that in place. I think I'm going to mount my power switch directly behind my receiver. In that area. Cut off a piece of servo tape for that. Servo tape's a little bit longer and wider here, so press it onto the bottom. I'm going to trim it around the outsides. And I don't like to leave a whole lot of excess on this stuff because it gives places for dirt to stick and it just looks bad. So I kind of cut to fit everything. Try to make it the same size as the base of the piece that I'm mounting down, or just a smidge smaller. Okay. Okay. That paper is a pain in the butt. All right. Let me get the power button down to place. And make sure you don't have your battery plugged in at this point if you're mounting down your power switch and stuff, because you'll have all sorts of crazy garbage going on. You'll be trying to turn on, you'll be trying to do your calibrations and all that stuff. All right, so we've got my receiver, got my power switch. Up next, we've got the transponder. So a good idea with the transponder is to mount it forward of the car as low as possible. So when you're crossing the loop on the racetrack, you get a good strong signal, and moving it forward of the car, you never know when you need that extra hundredth of a second to win a race. See it all the time. So make sure I got all the dirt off the bottom of that thing, and then we're going to put some servo tape on that bad boy, and we're going to mount it there. Now, I like under the hood of my car to look nice and neat. I don't like these wires going everywhere. I don't like these electronics sitting out in the open, like the receiver and stuff like that. I much prefer to have it inside of a box. So long term, I'll probably end up taking the box that I made for my other Mayako and mounting it in here the same way. So basically what I did was I took Mayako's battery and receiver box from their Nitro car that's been out for a couple of years now. I took a Dremel and I cut the battery section off of the receiver box using a Dremel, and then cleaned up the edges between, so it looked like it was made to be the way it was. It don't look anything like what it was when I first bought it. And then it's also a yellow plastic. There again, Mayako stuff with a Mayako part number. I just had to modify it for my needs, but yes, it was yellow. It was the same color yellow as everything else, so all matched up pretty good. Put the transponder down in there. Whenever I use double-sided tape, I'll push it down and I kind of work it into place with pressure on it for a few seconds, just to get it to start setting. Now, put all of our wires here. I'm going to shape the wires. Get it cleaned up as much as possible. And need a zip tie, a small zip tie. We're running around the whole bundle here. Now, from what I understand, these new Hobbywing ESCs have an issue with where the wires go into the side of the power button. So I'm going to take extra care to bundle it with the rest of the wires in my harness here to reduce any pulling and vibration and shaking. So this bundle here is going to be nice. It's nice and tight. It's not going to move around too much the way I've got it, and it's going to help support those wires going into the side of the power switch for the ESC. Sweet. Alright guys, at this point we've got all of our electronics mounted, soldered in, ready to go. We're ready to power this thing up. We're going to calibrate our remote to the ESC. We're going to plug up our tuner. We're going to tune it. And then we're going to go through and we're going to put tires on this thing, and we're going to set our caster and our camber, or our camber and our toe with wheels on it, and get this thing ready to put on the track and test. So then all I've got to do is just mount my wing and paint a body. So we'll do a separate body painting video. There'll be a lot of pausing in that because there's several steps that I can't take the camera with me to do it. So I'll be going outside to paint and I'll be leaving my camera behind. So I'll do a step, explain to you what I did, explain to you what I'm going to do next, and then do the next step. So we're going to start off with plugging our battery in. So we're going to make sure we plug our terminals in correctly. The one with the red stripe is the positive. It goes to the positive on the battery. One without is the negative. It goes to the negative on the battery. I'm not plugging it all the way in because I am just setting it up right now. If I was racing, I'd plug these all the way in the top of the battery. I'm not going to be doing any amp draw. It's just getting it together. Alright, turn on my remote here. It says Mayako on the screen. So we're going to hold the little button down for the ESC. Press the power button while holding the little button. Alright, you hear that? That's asking for commands. So we're going to go full throttle. Push the button. Why is it doing that? Alright, let's try again. Hold the little button, press the power button. Pull the throttle. Hold on. I don't know what this thing's doing. Push small button, hold it, turn it on. Supposed to do that. Go full throttle. Alright, let's look at the directions. Did they change something? Because normally it's hold down the button, hold down the small button, push the big button, power it up, send it. Push the small button, turn it on, put the remote on full throttle, push it again. Programming, OTA, preset, vector reset. Connections, ESC setup. Okay. Set the throttle in. There we go. Well, first, use the ESC transmitter, changes trim, tune, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so turn on the transmitter and ensure all parameters on the throttle are 100%. Start by turning on the transmitter with the ESC turned off and connected to a battery. Holding the set button, then press the on-off red button. The red LED on the ESC starts to flash. The motor beeps at the same time, and then release the set button immediately. Set the neutral point, the full throttle endpoint, and the full brake endpoint. Okay, that's where I was messing up. Okay, supposed to start with neutral throttle brake. Do this again. Oh, put my button, my finger off the button. Turn off. Alright, neutral, full throttle, brake. Sweet. Alright, that rotates backwards, so I'm going to have to set the reverse. Let me see if I can do it in my remote. Let me see, linkage menu, channel reverse, channel 2 is reverse. Let's try that. My steering is right. What happened there? It doesn't like that channel reverse on here, so I will change that in the setup. Alright, so because Hobbywing and their infinite frickin' knowledge, such brainiacs, the reason why I quit using their ESCs is they're a pain in the butt. I've got to be able to get to my programmer port on the side of the ESC, which is where? In between all these frickin' wires. Let's see, which two is it in between? Okay, so it's going to be in between the first two wires right here, so I've got to get in there with a pair of needle nose and get this cap off. And now I've got to use the same needle nose, and I've got to try to get in here, see what I'm doing, and plug this terminal onto the ESC correctly. Can't see nothing. Oh, light come on? No. Plug on there. They have it backwards. Alright, lights on now. So, my cell phone, I have the Hobbywing OTA app on my phone. Let's see here, where's HW Link V2? I'm gonna hit our link up at the top. We got our Hobbywing right here, module connecting. It's connected. Gonna check for a firmware update. It's showing that I'm running firmware 0.1. I have available version 0.3, so we're going to run an update on this bad boy. First thing we do, we never want to race without updating our ESC, because a lot of times out of the box they got issues that they didn't realize they had when they released it. That's what they say anyhow. Don't know that for a fact. So every ESC I've ever run and plugged up has had an update within a month of being installed, if it didn't have one right out of the box. Some ESCs got more issues than others. Sometimes the update does not fully correct the situation that you're having. It may just be like a minor quick fix to get you by until they can get the full update out that fixes everything. Alright, so we're at 53%, 54%. Now once it's all together, I should be able to reverse the polarity on my motor and do a couple little tuning things in here. I don't really do a whole lot to the tuning on them. I run them mainly out of the box, but I don't run reverse. So I'll set it up pretty basic, and then I'll turn reverse off. $95, $96, $97, $98, $99, $100. Sweet. ESC restarts itself. Once it does that, you have to reconnect your link at the top right. Select your device again. It connected. Now I'm going to go into parameters. And in the parameters, you can go through and you can do all your settings inside your ESC, what you want it to do. Oh wait, parameters not loaded. Try that again. Oh, the ESC restarted again after I hooked it up. All right, let's reconnect again. There it is. Showing connection in top right, little chains connected in top right. Parameters. It's connecting to the ESC. Loading information. Is talking. All right, we go through and we got a whole long list of settings. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to running mode, forward with brake, already there. Max reverse force is at 25%. I'm running without reverse, so that don't really matter. LiPo cells, auto calculate. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set that to 4 cell. This car will only run 4 cells. It'll never have a 3 or a 2 or anything like that in there, only 4 cells. So we're running 4 cells. Cutoff voltage, I'm going to leave that the same. Thermal protection the same. Motor protection the same because it's a matched motor, so everything should be good there. Smart fan on this ESC, we'll leave it enabled unless I see a problem with it, and then we'll change it later. Sensor mode, full censored. Is there a hybrid? Yeah, I'm going to put that in hybrid mode in case we lose a sensor wire. Motor rotation is counterclockwise. We're going to go clockwise. AC phase swap disabled. Throttle curve is linear, neutral range 6%, initial throttle force 2%, coast is at 0. Drive PWM drive frequency, I've got 8,000, softening value 0, softening range 0, RPM limit is unlimited. That's something that you could play with. You can turn the motor down a little bit just by using that. You can limit your RPM, so your car will be full power up until it reaches that RPM, and then it'll choke it. Drag brake force, I run 0. So if you like drag brake, you can add some. Brake rate control is showing 20 on here. I think it's a 0 to 20 on that, so it's pretty much maximum brakes. Traditional brake control. ABS force, 20%. Listen, buddy. We don't do ABS, so we're turning the ABS off. This brake curvature, brake frequency, 1K, we're leaving that there. Boost timing, turbo timing, both at 0, we're leaving that there. Yeah. So we're going to start off with pretty much a basic setup. We're just make sure that it stays on 4 cells. Making sure we're forward with brake, no reverse. Make sure our rotation is correct. Make sure we take the drag brake out because I don't do drag brake. ABS, we don't want ABS. If you're racing, you don't want ABS. If you're running a basher, throw it on there if you want, try it. But nah, if you want to learn to drive, go without ABS. We turn down our brake rate and our remotes to be able to give it an ABS style feature. Alright guys, so that's a 0 timing profile on here. There's an 8th off-road profile. Let's look at the 8th off-road profile. I didn't notice that it had that before. Let's look at that. We may just go with what it tells us. Just need to make sure our motor rotation is correct. So, forward brake, blah, 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 auto cutoff, good. ESC and motor protection, good. Smart fan, good. Sensor mode, sensor hybrid. Motor rotation, flip it. Remote was already turned off. They turned down the throttle rate control a little bit. Gave it a little more neutral range, a little less initial throttle force. Still full coast. Oh, they gave it a little softening. Drive frequency 20,000. Goodness gracious. Yeah, they turned that up. So they turned the frequency up. They gave it a little softening. RPM limit still good. They've got the max brake force at 40% on this. We'll try it. We'll try it. I can turn the brakes up later if I want to. It don't take but a minute to hook this stuff up. ABS 15%. Listen, I told you before, we don't do ABS. ABS is for full-size cars that aren't racing. Brake frequency, they added some turbo timing at 12 degrees on here, turbo delay at 0.1 seconds, turbo increase rate 15 degrees at 1 second, and turbo decrease rate 15 degrees at 1 second. Alright, so they added a bunch of turbo in there, which will probably help some. And they changed the frequencies on some stuff and the rate controls on some stuff. So we'll run with this 8th off-road setup. We'll see what Hobbywing has for that. Who knows? I might like it, might hate it. Saving the setup. Alright, save successful. So that went to the ESC. Then we're going to disconnect. ESC is going to start back up. I'll unplug my programmer here. Now, full throttle, make sure it goes the right way. Yep, goes the right way. I think the next thing we're going to do is a setup video. So, now that we've got everything inside the car, I'm going to get the wing mounted on this thing. I'm going to get the tires put on this bad boy. I'm going to set up my camber my camber tools. We're going to start getting all that stuff set up. I'm going to show you a trick way to do your toe on the front end without having to have a setup station. Pretty neat little thing that I figured out one day, and I've showed a couple people, and I see people using it now. I'm sure somebody else has come up with the way. I just came across it myself. I didn't learn it from somebody. One day I was like, hey, why don't I do this? And it worked. So I'll show y'all what that is, so y'all can pass it along to other people that don't want to buy an expensive setup station. They could do it with just a standard setup standard camber gauge. And it don't matter if you're using a cheap plastic one or you got an aluminum one. I mean, the $5 one off Amazon should be able to do it. So, thank you guys for watching this setup. We're getting really close to being done with the build itself. Of course, the paint is going to be a whole nother thing. I'm probably going to go out later today and practice and do some tuning setup with it. When I do that, I'll just throw my old body on here. And that painting on that body is going to take a while to cut vinyl, put it in place, and then paint it. So I'm going to spend a day to where I've got a few hours to mess with that to get it done. I don't have that time today. So like I said, I'm going to end this video. We'll come back. We'll have a shorter video up next. When you come back, I'll already have the wing set on place, and I'll have the tires on it, and I'm going to have my tools out ready to do the setup. And we'll do a short video on my setup that I do on my cars, why I do the setup the way I do on my cars, and what I look for in my setup on my cars. So again, thank you guys for watching this video. We're going to take a stop and see you guys in the next one. Thank you.